Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Better. I've had a stomach flu for 3 days, so I'm recovering from that.
Yeah. What did you say for 3 days? I didn't hear that part.
A stomach flu.
Stomach flu. Okay.
Yeah, so I've been real bad for the last 2 days, but it's getting better today. At least everything staying inside what should be staying inside, so that's nice.
Oh no. Stomach flu for 3 days. Yeah, but you said you had gotten some news and fill me in again. It was that someone became your lead or your boss or what happened exactly?
Yeah, someone became my lead, team lead. Uh, do you want to dive right into this right away, or
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Unless you had
okay?
something else you want to talk about first. Yeah. Whatever you want to do is fine.
No, no. Normally you do like little like, hey, chat, can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear Remy?
They said audio sounds good, so I think that's yeah, we'll just move
All right,
forward with that. Yeah.
all right. Just want to make sure. Uh, so yeah, thanks for fixing that typo for me. I saw what you did there.
Very important.
Very, very. So yeah, let's first take a step back to like the entire reorganization we've been having with ICT.
Hmm.
So uh, we got a new ICT director. She basically said we're going to overhaul the entire ICT infrastructure. There's going to be new teams. There's going to be some merging with other teams. There's going to be splitting of other teams, et cetera, et cetera. So that's happened 2 months ago now, and basically we're still steerless in the water.
Hmm.
Nobody knows what's going on, what we'll be doing, and it's all just being basically a black box. And if you ask anyone about like, what is our new team supposed to do, they pretty much, we don't really know yet, but we'll see. Which has been quite a frustrating experience. And I have also in my one-on-one talk with the new IT director conveyed to her that this has been ongoing frustration for not just me, but pretty much everyone I talk to. Where yeah, we just left in dark. Like, hey, we had this, in my opinion, really well functioning team. We got some new people added to this team, and we got a new name, and we got a new team lead. But nobody really knows what we should be doing now, so we're just working as usual with some extra people doing their own stuff. But it's like really unclear. Like, hey, in the future we'll still be, doing the same jobs we've been doing. We'll be supporting the same people internally and whatnot. Just a lot of confusion and frustration around that.
Hmm.
And then on also the way this is communicated, at least in my experience, is really bad. Like, hey, we just get like an email and it's like, okay, everything's gonna change. There's like no nuance. There's like no one like comes to the floor and talk about it or something. So it feels like really black and white. Which to me, at least personally, is not the way things. Big change like that should be communicated. I feel like there should be a personal aspect in that I
Yeah.
feel like is missing. But that could just be me. And I've also conveyed this talk to this with the new IT director. I'm like, hey, if you're making big announcements like this, you might want to consider, doing it in a more personal way so people can ask questions instead of like, hey, here's an email, everything's gonna change and deal with it.
Hmm.
Then on Monday we got an email of like, hey, this is your new team lead. And I personally don't really like this person a lot. And not even personally, just like the way he works. All my past working experience with him have been pretty negative. Hearing from the team he used to lead before this, which was a non-IT team, I've also heard not great things by the
Yeah.
way he manages. In this entire week, he's been our manager. We haven't seen him once. Like, he's not even dropped an email. He hasn't like planned any meetings. Like, hey, let's catch up what you're doing, what your responsibilities are, whatnot. And I feel like those are really are things you should be doing. In your
Yeah.
first week of being a new team lead. Get in touch with your team. We do daily stand up now. We started that this week as well. Like, he doesn't attend those, and I don't know. It just gives me like bad management vibes, basically. Uh, yeah, I'm not sure how to deal with that as of yet because like he's not done anything for us yet, so I can't really gauge how he really is as a manager. I've just got like second-hand experience and dealing with him on a non-management basis, which has been pretty bad. But
Yeah.
yeah, the entire vibe with the team has been pretty negative since we got the news drop like, hey, this is going to be your new team lead.
Well, okay, so let's start with the director. You talked to the IT director, you communicated these things. What was her response to your concerns?
Uh, well, she acknowledged there's been like a lot of confusion and being in the dark, and she said, yeah, like but this is how we're doing things. Like, we're not going to wait any longer with communicating things. We're just going to do it right now. And she feels like this is the right way to do it and communicate things. Uh, So yeah, that was basically her response.
So the communication, if I can just make sure I'm understanding correctly here, excuse me, you felt that it was slightly impersonal and that they just sent an email, and this director said, "Yeah, we don't want to keep people in the dark." It sounds like what you wanted was something like a Q&A session. Is that correct?
Well, not necessarily a Q&A session, but like uh well, maybe, yeah, maybe yes, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
A place where if there's uncertainty, sorry, you can like ask questions like, hey, how do you guys envision this? Has this been thought about? That kind of stuff, and that I feel like all of that is missing right now. And part of that is because they don't have the answers themselves anymore. Like if I ask some questions like, hey, what do you expect I will be working on in like 3 months from now, half year from now? Uh, it's all basically, oh, we don't really know yet.
I see. So, um, the reason I bring this up is because there's a disconnect, and it's either happening between you two or it's happening between me and the events that transpired. Because in my mind, it was, Remy saying, "Hey, I don't like that this all took place over email," and the director saying, "We don't want to keep people in the dark." But that's not mutually exclusive with communicating via email versus having a forum. Do you think it was clear to her that you just meant, "No, I'm totally fine with the rapidity at which this is happening. I just wanted there to be a dialogue"?
Uh, I'm not sure if that got across like I intended it to be, because I think like those are both separate issues where I'm like, I think the way that this is being communicated isn't, the proper way, and I feel like that's something a lot of my peers share with me, and then on top of that, there's like just not enough information. So like, there's an improper way of communicating like big changes, and
Yeah.
there's also just not enough information to support such big changes.
I see. I
If
see.
that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. So it sounds like she didn't necessarily get the idea that, oh, hey, no, sharing now is problematic, sure, but also if you're going to share anything, maybe have a Q&A so that at least everyone's on the same page.
Yeah,
Do you have regular meetings set up with this director?
no, not at all.
And is there another one set up at some point?
Nope.
Okay.
No, and it is one of those things where they're like, oh, you can always walk in, the door is always open. But I don't know her well enough to, really feel comfortable just walking in and being like, hey, this is on my mind, or this is on the team's mind, or whatever.
So here's what I at sort of a high level, I consider this to be that workers are starting to become disgruntled, and possibly there's a solution and possibly there isn't. But I think in any case, you have to decide, do I want to do something about this, or am I willing to just sort of put up with it? And there's some amount of putting up with it that everyone's comfortable doing, right? If a problem lasts for 2 days and it could have lasted for 10 years, it's like, well, whatever. But if this is going to be your new future, which is working in doubt, not having certainty about these things, and not feeling like your voice is heard, that could be more frustrating. Um, why don't you feel comfortable walking in to this person's office?
I think basically just a disconnect between the two of us. Like she doesn't, on a Wednesday morning, doesn't walk around like the work and be like, hey, how are you? Like you don't have to go into like a depth conversation, but there's basically no personal connection to the team. For example, our old manager, 2 or 3 times a week, he just walk around, say hi, say good morning to everybody, and maybe ask some trivial questions and walk on. But I feel like just doing that every now and again, just lowers the threshold of being approachable, and
Yeah,
I'm
I
I'm
see.
missing that. I feel like.
So I think part of what you're butting up against here is that people do have different management styles and even different chatting styles. This person might be more introverted. They might just feel like, why would I make small talk with someone? I'd rather get to know them in a more meaningful way to them. I have the open door policy. To me, given what you've witnessed, given how you feel, it sounds to me like you should go and talk to her, use these office hours. One, not only to get to know her, but two, because you had some concerns that sound like weren't clearly communicated. She might still say, hey, we don't have answers to a lot of these questions. But you might say, well, it'd be nice to make that common knowledge then so that at least everyone's on the same page about not having those answers. Otherwise, I think what's going to happen is you'll feel like you're not being heard, and the venues that are available to you to fix this aren't being utilized. So you might feel helpless when really there are avenues you haven't tried yet. So I would say to try exercising those. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. feel as helpless here, and so that maybe the stance on things becomes common knowledge. I think that there's another aspect here that's maybe a little bit tougher, which is um, you're in a company with a hierarchy, and the concerns of the sort of leaf nodes of that hierarchy versus the people higher up is going to be very different. So probably this is not a very big concern for this IT director, and possibly it's because of what you said is that, oh, we're just doing work as usual, and maybe the new people aren't acclimating as well, or maybe they don't have certainty about what their roadmap is going to be. But you've still had work and you're still doing it, and maybe she's just counting on each individual team doing it, and that's her plan. And it'd be good to know that that's her plan, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
doesn't sound like she's letting things just stay on fire. Do you get that impression that things are going poorly or that the business is suffering?
Uh, yeah, somewhat, because we're also not picking up new things, because we're unsure like if we can or not, and asking questions about like, hey, should we be doing this? Basically stay unanswered.
Hmm. So you're not picking up
So
new
I
work, you said?
Yeah, well, no new big things. For example, for like, an internal client for us comes needs like, hey, can you create this piece of software for us, or can you work on this plugin? We just basically say we don't know if we can or not, and if
Yeah.
we ask our higher ups like, hey, is this a priority? Should we be doing this right now? It's basically, we don't know either.
But then what happens as a result of that? Is your team, possibly your new manager who I know has only just started, are they empowered to make that decision for themselves then to move forward? Or are they, the manager makes the decision and then the higher up people say, no, you can't do that? Like what's happening?
Not sure about that.
Okay.
I,
So
like I, at the moment, I don't even know who should be making these decisions.
um I'm still uncertain whether this is a visibility problem or not, because it's possible that the business could be doing well, that these decisions could be made well, and it's different from the status quo and it feels alarming to you. And it's
Mhm.
possible that things are actually being dropped and that no one knows who should be responsible for something and they're just pointing fingers. To some extent, I would say it's it's maybe not your job, but it might still be a concern of yours. And I think it's worth figuring out where those lines are, because just as an example, if you see another team doing something that's bad or that's wrong, you'd have to analyze like what's the impact of that? Do I need to elevate this concern? Like I'm not on that team, so I'm not going to deal with this code, but is it worse for the company? In this case, there's a new client who comes to you and says, "Hey, we have some work we'd like you to do." Your management goes and talks to the higher ups. They say, "Well, we don't know about this." And then the knowledge of that just sort of fizzles. Is the work being taken on? Are those clients being told, hey, just in the future at some point come back to us? Is management waiting on the higher ups to have more clarity into this? So let me ask you this: if you still did your work and do you feel like you're occupied during work? Are there large lulls or dead times?
No, so currently I'm working on a big migration project that's going live this weekend actually.
Hmm.
Uh, so that's been occupying all of my time. But after this, I'm currently still unsure. What do I pick up after like Monday after all's tested and done? What will I be working on? And who do I even ask? Do I ask my new team lead? Do I ask the IT director? Do I ask the guy in the middle between those two? Like unsure. I'll probably figure out next week somewhere, hopefully.
So, we're gonna eventually need to get back to your new manager about this, but Monday you're gonna go in and let's say that the migration went totally fine. Testers are saying everything's green. What would your action be? What do you think you would do? Where would you start?
I'll talk with my new team lead to ask him, hey, what do you want me to work on? But and this might just be uh, some bias or guesswork, but most likely he'll tell me, I don't know because I've only been here a week and I don't know what you normally work on.
Yeah. And then what would you do if you heard that?
I'll go to the next up manager above that, but he's been with the company for 7 weeks. He barely knows me. He doesn't know what I work on. So, and then the person above that is the new IT director who's been there for 2 months. Same thing. So it feels like a lot of, knowledge about the teams and what they used to work on has just, disappeared in the last 2 months. and the entire chain has been renewed uh, with non-IT people as well.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's just like a gap there now.
So let me ask you this, because part of what I think about, and you might have heard me talk about this in some other mentoring sessions with other people, not necessarily you, is that as you grow in your career, as you grow in level, you switch from being told what to do to becoming more independent to eventually leading other people to eventually coming up with problems for entire business units to solve. You have some knowledge here. You've wanted to shift more toward management and give it a shot. If you were the manager, if those three people in your management chain came to you and said, Remy, what do you want to do? What do you think is right for this team? Do you think you'd have some insight there?
Yeah, yeah, I believe so.
Okay. So if Monday rolls around, you talk to your new team lead who's only been there for a week as your team lead, and they say, I don't know what you usually work on, elevate, elevate. No one knows in the chain. Would you then take on what you think is the right intention? How would you go about doing this?
Yeah, I'd suggest some things that I think are high priority things coming from the business towards me.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest those things and ask which they want me to work on then.
So here's here's what I think. I think that going into any sort of possibly difficult conversation, it's worth trying to predict what the other person might say. And in this case, I don't know what you think about the difficulty of the conversation, but Monday's probably going to roll around. Maybe there's some work from the weekend. Maybe you get that done in a couple days. I don't know. But at some point, you're going to need to talk to your new manager, who's still going to be new at the time. Hey, what do you think I should do? You think they're probably going to say, I don't know what you should do. At that point, you've sort of predicted accurately. But then I think the prediction itself is not what's valuable. It's what do you do with what you think is going to happen. And in this case, given that you think they're going to say no, and given that you have insights, rather than escalate to someone else who you probably think is going to say no, I would probably talk to your manager and say, look, here's what I see as the landscape. We've had a lot of management changes. I have some pretty good insight into what I think we should do. I've also been maybe steering a little bit toward management myself or something. I don't know. You could figure out the messaging. But essentially, like, I don't want to be directionless. And I suspect that after I've gone through these hops of talking to people, that I will be directionless. So why don't we set some direction ourselves? This does a lot of good things for you. For one, it lets you exercise your independence. Two, is it signals to your manager that you have a grip on what's happening. And three, it gives you the work that you would have otherwise not had. So, how do you feel about that as a route of going in with a battle plan, essentially?
Yeah, I think that sounds fair. The only thing I usually don't do that kind of stuff is feel like if I prepare something I expect a certain outcome or something and then that doesn't happen. I feel like I'd be too focused on the thing I expected already to be kind of caught off guard if it doesn't. If that makes sense.
Yes, it makes sense. I think this is part of this career growth, though. I think that early on, when you're planning things in a small enough scope, and this is true for pretty much anything, when you plan things in a very small scope, it's easy to control the variables that might happen and make sure that you get that outcome. But once you start involving more people, once there's this uncertainty coming from the inherited business burden of just new people came in, then I think it's harder to control for those variables. And instead of trying to control them, I think it's being more flexible with the outcome. So you might not get the outcome you want. And maybe it's worth planning what that feels like. So let's say you do talk to this manager and you say, look, here's what I see as the landscape. Here's what I think we should do as business objectives coming up. And they say, you know what? I don't agree with that. Like, what might you do as a result of that?
Yeah, I don't know. Like if I go in without any thoughts of like what I want to do, I feel like I'd be okay with that. If I feel like okay, I've set up this plan and things I would want to do, I think I kind of uh put back on it. Like I think I'd lose my flexibility if I set up a plan beforehand myself.
Um, why is that? Because that seems very interesting to me.
Uh, I don't know. Uh, I feel like if I set my mind to something, I really want to do it that way and do that thing. So if I'm like, okay, he's not gonna know, and I come with an offering of solution or it's something I want to work on, and if I agrees, that's fine, and I can do the thing I wanted to do. And if he says like no, but like doesn't come with an alternative, or like comes with then something I've not planned for, or something like that, I feel like I'd have a harder time accepting it than when I just go in with like a blank mindset and be like, okay, let's just roll with the punches.
I see what you're saying. I think this is hinting at some deeper things than what we're talking about on the surface here. If you were to go in with a plan and you are more well informed than this new team lead, and the team lead has reasonable basis to disagree with the plan, let's say they say, just as an example, that'll cost too much money. Okay,
Hmm.
totally reasonable, right? You can't just create money out of thin air. Hopefully you'd find that acceptable, by the way, but let's say you didn't. Let's say there was
Yeah.
something that it's like, oh, I just don't believe in that idea. This is essentially a difference that could possibly be reconciled or possibly not. And people typically will leave teams or companies if they disagree with the fundamental philosophy of running that team or that business. And at some point, you've got to decide, am I okay with the environment that I'm in? Do I want to change it or do I want to find a new one? That is always the core question to ask yourself for any job you're ever going to have. So right now you're frustrated, you're confused, you have expressed some of these confusions, and I'd say it's early on enough where it's not like you've tried for so long that okay, this is
Yeah.
irreconcilable. So I wouldn't conclude that yet here. But you can go talk to this manager. Having a plan is important. Getting tunnel visioned on that plan, I'd say, is a problem that we need to address. But not having a plan would basically be you going to the manager saying, I see some problems. Your manager says, okay, well, how do you propose fixing them? You've been here for a while. You're like, I don't know. That would not
Yeah,
be a
that's
fruitful
useless.
conversation. So I think you need the plan. And I think you need to predict then a little bit more about how might this go if they disagree. What might they disagree on? So for example, let's back up and let's do sort of mini role play here. You have some insights you've said, and you presumably can boil those down to some tasks for at least you, possibly for other people. Okay, so let's say you go talk to your manager and they push back with some sort of reasonable assumptions that they have. How might you react based on that?
If they're, reasonable suggestions, then of course I'm fine to go with those suggestions.
Would you converse at all and try to push back on some of their suggestions? Like, well, I've been here for a while and actually you say this isn't feasible in 3 months, but here's why I think it is. Would you, or would you just say, like, okay, well, now I know their viewpoint. I should go and regroup and figure out my next plan?
Uh, I guess that one depends on like how big the rift is between how I envision it, how big he envisions it. Like if there's like I think that his decision is really at odds with what my clients internally want, then I would probably push back on it. If I think it's something that's reasonable, then I'll probably just go with it. At the end of the day, he's still the team lead, so he decides.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, and now let me ask you, what do you think is likely? Do you think it's likely that you would propose a plan and the manager would push back? Do you think they would be like, "Oh, thank goodness, I haven't had any direction. I don't know, I've been confused myself."
Uh, I'm unsure about that.
Okay. Yeah. Um, with that said, I sometimes feel like there's a right thing to do and maybe not even wrong things to do, but maybe inactivity or something like that, such that it doesn't matter if it's hard, if it's difficult, if you get pushed back, and you're frustrated. Possibly other people are in the same boat. Have you talked to them? Do they feel like, yeah, we also don't have direction once we're done with these projects?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of frustration in the team. There's also people already, mentioning like if it keeps going like this, I'll just look at other teams and stuff like that. It's something that's equilibrially felt between the team pretty much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Lost more people than just Remy. Okay, yeah. I think these signs are pointing to this is sort of the right thing to do is go in, have your plan, talk to the new team lead and see how they feel. And maybe this is me being brazen, not being in the situation, or and maybe it's just a different working style. But if this person, this team lead pushed back or something or said, oh, go talk to the higher ups, I probably would say, look, I suspect that the higher up people are going to tell me I also don't know what to do. No one has this context. They're not going to have just gained it in 2 months. I have a reasonable plan here. Who do I need to sort of convince, or how do I convince those people? Do you have my back? I'd probably just ask those things because I wouldn't want to work in an org where I don't know what's going on. I don't trust leadership. I, I think those are core to just operating day to day. And
Yeah, and
yeah, go on,
sorry.
go on.
Oh, I feel like there's probably my biggest frustration point. I feel like, of course you can't gain all this knowledge in 2 months, and that's fine. I don't expect you to. But at least from what's visible for me, not a lot is done to get this insight.
Yeah,
And maybe that is being done, but just not with me, maybe with my colleagues, but like I don't know, maybe they're talking with the clients directly. Like maybe I just don't have the insights. But if they're doing that, then it's not being conveyed clearly that they are actively working on getting these insights or getting a plan ready. Like I doubt that they're sitting still, just tumbling their fingers and seeing how it all pans out. I'm sure they're doing something, but that something right now is a black book that's just panning out to be quite frustrating for myself personally, at least.
Yeah, and I think this is exacerbated by your team lead's absence in what you consider to be a crucial week for actually showing your face and talking to
Yeah.
people. And that's understandable. And I want to get to that at some point. And it's what's written next. But this not having visibility into something, like I said, I think this can be potentially a problem in a different way. You probably shouldn't know what's going on in a day to day in like the CEO, for example. And to not have that kind of visibility is fine, it's acceptable. But they should have probably shared a high level, like, here's what we're doing in the next 6 months, or here's what we're doing in the next 5 years, something along those lines. Um, with this new management, they're close enough to you that they're not the CEO. And it's reasonable to have some confidence, especially if the team is feeling this, which is again why, if nothing else comes out of this, the two biggest things I'd say are: one, have a plan, talk to your team lead on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whenever you feel like you've got the stability from the migration that happens this weekend. And two, feel comfortable enough, find some way to feel comfortable to go into the office hours with your director and say, look, some of these things weren't communicated totally properly. And some of it is just still, we're feeling this frustration. It's like, this is a problem for us on the ground floor. So yeah, two biggest things so far: talk to your team lead after the migration is done and have a plan for what you propose, and enter the director's office hours and communicate the frustrations again until you feel like you've got some acceptable answer, I guess. Um,
Yeah, like it's as an example of like how I feel like the new team needs to do a better job. Like I said, I'm doing this big migration this week. Ever since it's got communicate he's our new team lead, I've been seeing him in all the emails regarding this. Sending him updates, and like he hasn't even bothered to like drop a message like, hey, is this weekend still on? How's it going? And if you're like as a team lead, that's basically the bare minimum you should do when like a big project is coming up in the team, even though you've just been there for like 2 days.
yeah, yeah, I agree with this. So let me sort of explicitly say a transition point here. Let's keep those two big things in mind because I think this is going to have to be the path moving forward. And now I want to talk about the manager's onboarding to your team, this team lead. So you said that Monday of this week is when they started? Okay, and are they present in the office?
Uh, so I've been at home at least Thursday and Friday because I was sick, but I was still, online on Teams and everything working. And I was in the office Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I haven't seen him either of those 3 days actually. I think he was in the office one of those days, but we just, basically ran past each other.
Okay. Because here's the thing. For sure, there should be some communication, but it's possible that communication happened in a way that for whatever reason it was missed and it's no one's fault. So for example, let's say this person has a kid and their kid is in the hospital or something. It's like, okay, I don't expect them to be in the office, I don't expect them to be productive, but I would expect them to say something like, I'm not going to be around. Is everyone on the same page about this? Is it possible something like that happened and there it was in a way that you didn't see because of the stomach flu or something?
It is very possible.
Okay.
Yeah, because like I don't know like the ins and outs of like the last 2 days, at the workplace. I haven't matched anyone today. Like, hey, did you see new team lead today or something? So maybe he had like a small talk or something at the office today to the new team. I wouldn't know, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel like if you did, you'd probably send an email or like a Teams message to like, hey, I noticed you weren't there, but come see me Monday because I had a talk with the team this week and I'd
Yeah.
like to have one with you as well. That's what I would expect from someone personally,
I
if
agree.
that were
I
the
agree.
case.
And this is what I say is I think you need to make sure these things are visible. When I was working last for a company, it was during COVID, and during the isolation part of it, people were really good about sending out emails to everybody because that's the only way you could communicate with anyone. No one was in the office. Then during the transition period, while people were starting to go back, anything that happened in person was likely not replicated to email. So people lost the awareness of, hey, I'm going to tell the people who are remote workers. And yeah, I would have to find out through sort of not the optimal means, I would say. So That's what kind of makes me think something like that might have happened because this is very unusual behavior. Have you talked to your direct team about whether they also feel this? Do they have any more insight into why was this manager sort of aloof?
No, from what I talked with two other colleagues directly about this, and they feel pretty much the same as me, where they're like, we haven't seen him. Why is he even our new team lead? That kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But I haven't talked to him in the last 2 days, so maybe something changed. I wouldn't know.
yeah, I see. Okay. Bottom line from this stuff is if you think this person is going to be your team lead for, let's say, months, and that it's not just some interim thing that's going to last for a couple of weeks, which, by the way, if it was an interim thing, it's like you should have known about this. But then if I were that manager, I probably wouldn't have one on ones with my direct reports that I'm only going to have for
Yeah,
two
no,
weeks.
he's here to stay.
Yeah, he's here to stay. Yeah. So, bottom line is if this person's here to stay, you'll need to have some working relationship with this person. And I know you've had some bad experiences in the past. And I think what you said earlier is that you sort of don't think they'd be a good manager, but you don't have any experience with them as a manager. Is that correct?
Yeah, like of course, like what I've heard, like I've had negative working experience with him, but
Yeah.
like there was in a peer situation basically.
Yeah.
I've heard, secondhand from other people how he is as a manager. But I take those with a grain of salt. I've never worked for him directly,
Yeah.
so I'm, open to how he wants to do that. There's probably some bias in that, I'll admit from what I've heard from people. But I won't say like, okay, he's a bad manager because I don't know because he's never managed me.
Yeah.
So, I'm waiting to find out, but, having a bit of a bias already and then, seeing how the first week went, I do feel like that negatively impacts my opinion.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And I
Yep.
find it quite hard to decouple that from, having a professional work ethic and being like, okay, maybe he's busy, maybe he's, overwhelmed by something else.
Yeah.
So there's possibly a bit of that.
No, no, and I understand. I think that's very tough. The other thing too is like I don't know anything about this person, and you know probably a little bit about this person, but you never know. Do they want to be a manager? Do they want to be a good manager? Are they trying to improve? Have they already improved since you last saw them? Are these gripes that you had originally going to be irrelevant because they're not going to work in that same capacity with people anymore? So there's a lot to be seen. But like I said, if they're there to stay and you don't plan on leaving teams, then you'd have to find some way to make it so you don't hate your job. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's going to involve either talking to this person or dealing with it or leaving the team or something. Let me ask you about that. Have you thought of what would it take to get you to leave the team? At what point are you frustrated and you flip a table and say, "I'm done. I'm out."
Oh yeah, that's something I have thought about when I feel like, if the situation doesn't improve in like, 2, 3 months down the line and things are like still confusing and basically, black box, nobody knows what we're gonna do. Then I have looked and asked around all the teams like, hey, are you guys looking for people? Could you use me? Uh, so it is something I'm open to if things, don't improve at
Yeah.
least.
And to be clear, you said you've already talked to other teams about do you have an opening?
Well, not really an opening, but just gouging on a high level, like, hey, how are you guys like understaffed? Like could you use someone?
I see.
But
Uh,
not directly asking like, hey, can I guys come work with you? Not that direct.
yeah. And it's worth asking. I know how you've signaled this in the past to me. Would you consider looking outside of the company?
Yeah, but like not as not as
Yeah.
my first go-to because I really like the company. I love the people I work with. You know, if I could, I'd work here for the rest of my life. I'm that kind of guy. I don't like job hopping a lot. But if this is like a broader thing that keeps on happening, then yeah, I would.
Yeah. 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 Okay. I think my view of the sort of plan, if I were you, would be the two things I talked about earlier, which is go and talk to people. This is certainly the kind of problem that communication solves, as opposed to, well, we just need to fix up some code or something. And then
Yeah, it's
barring,
definitely a communication issue.
yeah, barring that, it would be looking at other teams, and I would expect someone to have an opening or something. You might get some politics involved, and you get blocked by moving, or who knows what might happen there. But it's at least a good plan for now, and then reevaluating if any of this goes awry and you can't find a path through this.
Yeah, and I think also I should probably mention about this that I feel like left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth is that, as we've mentioned before, I've been working on this moving towards management myself,
Hmm.
did a training looking at this. I conveyed this to the new IT director, conveyed to the new manager, and they never communicated anything about like this team lead position becoming a thing. It was all done like behind closed bars. They never communicated like, hey, we're looking for someone in this position, and not saying I should have been the one that had gotten it, because I think they should definitely weigh in my skills and experience and stuff like that. Uh, but I feel like at the very least, they might have said like, "Hey, we know you're looking to move into this position, but we're looking to fit it elsewhere." And I kind of feel like that left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth, where they knew I was aiming for this. I actively conveyed this. I've been actively taking steps toward this, and then they just, basically did it all behind closed doors and dropped an email like, "Hey, there's a new team lead, by the way." So I feel like that might also, well, it probably did affect my personal opinion on things as well. Where
Yeah.
I feel like, hey, they just, shoved me aside, didn't even, inform me that this was a thing or anything.
Yeah. Um, Let me think about this. Because there are many different factors here to weigh. One of them is that you may have been personally spurned by this, but you've talked to a couple other colleagues who also see that your team lead hasn't been present and active. And then presumably you've talked to other people. I think you might have mentioned this, but I'm hazy on it now. You talked to other people about the larger org plans and how they're unclear, and that you're not the only person in this boat. So while it is unfortunate that this happened, it sounds like there are problems that are worth addressing. Also about this, I think there's any number of reasons why someone might have picked a team lead, and it's hard to say what they should have done. Like, did they owe you an explanation? Did they have to keep you in the loop? How many other people were there? Maybe there were, I don't know, 5 people vying for the position, and it was never up for grabs. I don't know. I don't know what the situation was there. These are the kinds of things I would say don't let it fester as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm also aware that like they don't owe me anything in that regard. Like it's a company, it's not my best friend, So I do kind of take that approach to it. They're not obligated to inform me of this if it's like they had someone in mind and they just gone for that person instead. That's fine. But I just feel like personally it feels a bit sour or something.
Yeah. I think
Especially when like the motto is always like, oh, like we're a human focused company, like we always like think about our employees. And I'm like, okay, you say that, but then you don't really show it with these kind of things.
Yeah, I think this is a broader problem, which is that a company has a
Yeah, for sure.
stance, yeah, but management doesn't necessarily exemplify that stance. And it's because management didn't come up with that stance, right? They have their own stances that they probably do some things better than the company does and some things worse than the company
Yeah.
does. But I agree. It sounds like you'd like more communication by default. And as I mentioned, I'm getting your viewpoint on this. And I recognize that that's a good thing. And I would try to do this if I were a leader there. But it's hard to know from the situation where are they focused and where do they feel like they need to communicate or what's a blind spot for them. So it's possible, and this is why I say to talk to them. It's possible this is a blind spot. It's possible you talk to the IT director and they're like, oh man, I get it. Yeah, I see this. Yeah, other people are starting to say this too. I didn't understand where you were going originally. We've got to fix this. And then, sounds like everything would just be fine and they do what they can. It also is possible that they're like, we just don't agree with this. You don't need to be told about anything and you'll do work when you're assigned it. And that's another signal. And you need to do with that what you will, which is either, yep, I agree with this, or I'm willing to live with this, or I want to find another
Or
team.
I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So um do you feel empowered? Do you feel like you can help change the outcomes of these things?
Uh, Unsure. I maybe, especially since it's not just me, from what I've gathered from talking to colleagues as well. But on the other hand, I also feel like having already mentioned these things and just feeling like they're kind of just shoved aside, I also feel like it might not change anything.
Yeah. Um,
I know there's a bit of a pop out answer maybe to say maybe, but
no. I think it's fine. I think here's what I've sort of learned and seen in so many different realms of my life is that you have influence, even if it's in small ways, to change outcomes. And that's what being empowered is, but people don't recognize it all the time. So sometimes they don't exercise those options that they have. And in this case, sometimes just starting this conversation, sometimes just being another point into this conversation is a good thing. And as a very innocuous, sort of silly example, how many times has someone ever been like, hey, you should watch this show, you should watch this show, and then a third or a fourth person tells you, and you're finally like, okay, now I'll watch it. And the first three people are like, well, why I suggested this too, why didn't you watch it then? It's like it just took some critical mass of that happening. It was no individual person who finally convinced you. It was that four people said it. Okay, maybe there's some reason to do this. That's what you could act as here, even if you feel like there's no other information you're adding to the conversation. It's just another data point. So that's why I don't think it's ever worth just saying like, okay, here's they've proven in the 1 week to 2 months time, depending on who we're talking about here, that they're not willing to work on this. I don't think we can conclude that yet. I think it requires a little bit more trying, and that's why I'm hopeful that something will happen here. And if not, hey, teams have crashed and burned before. Might be management switch. They made a bunch of mistakes. A whole lot of people left the team or the company, and hopefully they learned from that. But that's possibly in your future too. Who knows? But let's pursue it one step at a time. Um, how do you feel based on what we've talked about? Has it changed your lens of this situation at all? Do you feel like things are less dire or more positive? Or
I think things feel about the same, but I think you did give me some perspective, which is nice to have, uh, and some tools to go in, Monday and how to talk to my manager. So
yeah, yeah, and I hope it goes well. It doesn't.
same.
What was it?
Hope it goes well too.
Yeah. Well, what I was gonna say is, it doesn't sound like it's a dim hope. I
No,
don't.
no, no.
You've never mentioned that someone's sort of out to get you or they're impossible to work with or something. Like your manager, your team lead is a human. They're a person. They've got feelings. They've got goals, and a lot of that's just an unknown right now. So maybe you talk to them and they're like, I had no idea, or I'm new to management. I was scared about this stuff myself. They're probably not going to just open up and tell you everything, but you might get that signal from something that they say, like, oh man, yeah, I haven't scheduled one-on-ones with anyone. I didn't know when I should do that. That would let you know that, oh, it's inexperience that's causing this and not a willing lack of paying attention to people. So yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know about that. Like he's been in management for a while, and uh, like so, and for this from what I've heard, like he's the kind of person that just walks out of a meeting if he doesn't get his way either. So I feel like he probably would have already done this if he wanted to, like schedule those meetings.
Yeah.
This is like his way or the highway. It feels like kind of.
Yeah. Um, there's another route that I guess we haven't talked about here, which it's too early to say or to exercise yet. But at some point, if you do find out that, hey, this manager has some sort of toxic tendencies, that it could be worth escalating to the people above them and say, look, this has been going on for a long time. They just walked out of that meeting the other day. They didn't book one-on-ones with us when we started. We have no direction. This person is not a manager really. Like that is a good signal.
Yeah,
That's yeah.
I probably feel like that's a bit of a backhand way to like go over someone like that. So I don't think I would do that quickly.
I
Uh,
wouldn't suggest doing it quickly. I would suggest it if you feel like there's no other recourse and that your life is like actively worse. And then I guess sort of more important than that is that you could see it hurting the company. So every once in a while, there'll just be like a bad coworker, someone who for a long enough period of time that you can't just say, well, they were going through a rough patch, maybe like a year, they're just not doing good work. They're bringing down other people. They're causing bugs. And there's only so much you can do by talking to them. And that is why management exists. That's one of the jobs that they have. So I recognize it doesn't feel good. And yet it's like, well, if you care about your job in the company, yeah.
yeah, that's when I also feel like uh, I find it hard to like uncouple like the personal from the professional there.
Yeah.
Where I feel like the guy himself, he's not a bad guy. I can talk with him. I've talked with him in the past normally about like outside of work stuff, fine, and he's a decent guy.
Yeah.
So if I then go like, hey, you suck, put it really bluntly, uh, it like kind of feels like attacking someone as well, which I don't necessarily want, just because I think professionally they're not doing what I expect someone to do.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, like I said, I don't think this is a route you should jump to. And I think it's the kind of thing
No, no,
where,
no.
yeah, if you've exhausted your other options, it's like, well, now you're at a point where you still love the company, you still love the people you work with, your team lead hasn't improved when you talk to them, you give them enough shots. At some point, it's like, when do you escalate? By the way, there are times when I feel like you either can't or shouldn't talk to the person. It's like, what if someone's actively harassing you? Probably talking to them and saying, hey, can you not harass me? It's like, they're probably not
They're
going to be
gonna
like,
leave.
oh, yeah, sorry. I just didn't know you didn't like being harassed or something. It's like, those are causes for escalation. So at some
Yeah.
point, I feel like the professional realm falls into this too. You're not being harassed. You're not, they're not, and yet still there's a route you could take there. So anyway, part of the reason I list this stuff is because I think a lot of frustrations stem from feeling like I've made an effort and I've concluded that the effort won't matter when possibly the effort wasn't enough or at the right time or yeah. So uh, I hope that at least makes you feel like I can still do stuff here because you can. Okay, so anyway, that's that. If you have any thoughts on that, feel free to share. If not, I'm happy to move to something else.
I think it's good to close that topic.
Okay, yeah. So what's up next then?
So yeah, last time we talked about the AZ-104 trailing,
Hmm.
finished that. I think there were some good bits, things there were some less good bits. After that, the cloud migration basically took over all my time, so there's didn't do any trainings after that anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, it's did some good things, so that's proper news for the next training I want to do. That there'll probably be some good things in there as well.
Yeah, yeah. Also, this was the one that was like 40 hours long, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And would you say it was more good than bad?
No,
Okay. But still, I mean, even if out of 40 hours, 10 of those hours were worthwhile, sometimes
yeah,
that's kind of all it takes to make it a, a good thing to have done. Plus, I think it was required anyway, so it's like
yeah.
you had to do it.
Could get some rest for the other 30 hours, so that's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'll just say there wasn't more good than bad. Still apparently worthwhile. Management training. So you had a meeting early to mid November. Was with the third party company? Is that correct? Am I?
Yeah, something like that. So there's like the training coach, so to say.
Mhm.
At like an intake with him, where you like set your goals and discuss like what you would like to learn out of that training. Then there's like a thing where you get a feedback from colleagues and friends. The one I also sent to you.
Yeah.
And then there's like a 3-day training course. We were with 10 people in total. Where you just share with the group like, hey, this is the thing I want to work on, and this coach basically with the group gives you some tools and handles to work with, and gives you some insights, and it's like really focused on self-reflection as well. Like, hey, where does this issue stem from? Like, and these are the things you might want to do to help. And you like not only read through the feedback you get from your colleagues, but also in that group, like guide the experience, like, hey, how do people in this group deal with those kind of struggles and so on.
Yeah. Wait.
And I
Before you move on, was that stuff with the 10 people in total? That happened before our last session, right? I could have sworn you told me about this.
No, that was after our last
That was
session. So
after.
the
Okay.
intake was before that session, and I did it 2 years ago for like a different level of this training as well. And this happened about a month ago.
Okay. So can you tell me how did that go? Did you like it? Was it good? That 3-day training?
Yeah, I liked it. There's a lot of good takeaway from it, I think. It's also really heavy. It's like 3 days in a row, 10 hours a day, and you're like stuffed away in a hotel. And the hotel was nice, so it had a spa, so I went swimming and in a bubble bath every morning, which was great. Uh, but no, it's mentally quite rough because you're really like taking the time to look at yourself, like try to identify like where are these problems coming to. So for me, I basically said the same thing I've talked about with you, like that's setting boundaries for myself, saying no, stuff like that. And there's also feedback I got from a lot of peers that I sent a feedback request to, which is people saying like, hey, you can say no, right? We won't be upset if you say no. uh, so for me, those 3 days were really focused around that. And you basically have a little talking group where you have to do a little presentation about like, hey, this is the thing I struggle with, and then people share their experience with like, hey, I struggled with saying when this and this happened. I try and think like this and do that and that, and I think that was helpful.
Okay, so I want you to drill into this a little bit more. And I don't want you to, it's like, I don't want to poke the possible trauma that had happened from having to live this for 3 days and talk about the things that you think are gaps in your personality or work life. But um, Was it insightful? Did you get any strategies you didn't know? Did something take more that was harder to communicate than through mentoring?
Uh, I think it went great. I think just being there physically for like long extended hours and actively talking with people. There were also at some point there were like two play actors basically where like play out a scenario
Mm-hmm.
where you like don't set where he basically tried to put my boundaries and he get me to say yes every time even though I really didn't want to. Uh, and I think just actively working on it for extended periods of time is also nice. I think it's additive to the sessions I have with you. Uh, and a lot of the things uh, you say and they said reinforce each other as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's good to see as well to get the information from multiple standpoints basically, and even though they all say the same thing and you inherently pretty much know it, I think it helps to accept it as well a bit, to also
So
hear.
this was like November 13th to 15th or something, right?
Yeah,
So,
something
something
like
like
that,
that.
I think.
So it's been maybe only 2 or 3 weeks. Have you noticed a different perspective that you have as you now look at these opportunities that arise? Has your behavior changed at all?
I wouldn't say it changed necessarily just yet, uh, but I do think it's something I think back to every now and again, now and then. So I think in the long run that will help me to just remind myself of these things.
Yeah. Okay. Um, there's sort of there's like a larger behavioral and cognitive trend that I sometimes see, which is sort of recognizing that I'm going to say this very generally, so
Hmm.
hopefully this doesn't come off wrong. Recognizing there's a quote unquote bad behavior, recognizing that this might be the set of behaviors that we could use to change it, and then not making that change. And I see this path a bunch of times, and it's why we struggle with things. It's why people say like, "Oh, I have my demons," that sort of thing. Um, this is something that you yourself have recognized. Like I have a hard time saying no. It's something you recognize enough to the point where you brought it up in this training, and then it's something that your peers also reinforced, and it's now on your mind.
Yeah.
At some point, if you want this behavior to be behind you and not just on your mind, something has to change. And it's hard to make those changes because in the moment, you probably feel differently than you feel divorced from the moment. So, right now, I'm not asking you, hey, do you want to go rock climbing this weekend? And you're already exhausted, but you say yes anyway. We're just talking about hypotheticals where what if you had to say yes? And in that role playing situation, it's similar. The stakes are very low. You could say yes, you could say no. It wouldn't really make a difference. And you know what the right answer is. But in the moment, you're going to feel differently. So, um, I think this is something that I don't think we've touched on what could solve this per se. And I think the tenant system was supposed to help. And I did see further down, you said it's not really working for you. But I think I would try to keep that in mind moving forward is at what point am I have I changed behaviors and what caused it? Hang on one second. Sorry. Do you have any insight into that? And I know this is a very general question, but it's 3 years from now and you feel like you have a healthy set of boundaries. What got you there? Like, what do you think would have had to happen?
Yeah, I think just slowly actually doing it and seeing that there's no bad consequence to doing it, but only basically good things because I get more peace of mind and rest.
Yeah.
And actually, I was thinking about it a little bit, but I think I have actually been trying to do it. For one thing, I've stopped doing is just responding to teams outside working hours. For example,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that still try to call me even though my status is like set out of office or offline, and I usually still try to respond to them or something. And I basically told myself, okay, you're not working. If they didn't check your team status, that's on them. And just trying not to respond to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a first step at the very least.
I think that is very good. And I think this is part of where I think celebrating successes is important. You recognize this to be able to tell me about it. But maybe there are other ways that you're doing this too that are unconscious, that you don't realize that you've said no or that you've set a boundary that is healthy and it's different from what you've done. So it feels like there's friction. And they say that you train the people around you. If you respond to your phone literally 1 second from when it rings or beeps or whatever, then people are going to be trained to be like, oh, Ramy always responds. I'm going to call him. He's going to respond.
Yeah.
What you're seeing about people sort of ignoring your status is that momentum from the training you've done with them in the past. You've always responded outside of work hours, so it doesn't matter what your status is. That's just a weird blip, or that's a change in the team settings UI or something like that. So eventually they'll learn from your behavior that he does not respond outside of work hours. And in my mind, that's a very healthy boundary.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned is exactly what happened. Like at some point, one of the guys he called me at like 5 p.m. I always stop at 3:30 p.m. because I start really early.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day I told him like, hey, did you see that my status is out of office and I'm not there? And he just literally told me like, oh, always worth a try.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, yeah, normally I would have probably responded indeed. So, it was always worth a try, but I'm gonna stop doing that.
Yeah. And by the way, it's like, this is I'm in the no harm, no foul camp of like, people can still ping you whenever they want, right? They can ping you at 3 a.m. It's on you to set a boundary and to not respond. I don't think other people should have to change their behavior in this case, at least. So I think that's good. I think it's a healthy boundary. I also think that's a pretty clear and sort of obvious boundary. And I don't mean that in a bad way of like, you should have seen this before. It's just, it's like most people would probably say, don't do work after work hours. And that'd be like, oh, yep, no controversy. So I wonder, are there others that are less obvious? Like, hey, I'm bodily exhausted and someone asks me to go rock climbing or help them move or something like that. Again, is there like a slightly less obvious, like, well, I want to say yes, I don't want to displease them. Anyway, those are the things. These are not specific questions, but like analyze them as you move forward and realize what would it have taken me to say no. I think that's a good question to ask yourself.
I mean, I think last Wednesday was a clear example of this. You know, I always go climbing with some buddies of mine on Wednesday. I wasn't feeling too well already. I wasn't yet, aware of the fact I had a stomach flu. So I went climbing anyway, even though I felt, a little bit nauseated and tired. And it, take me actually falling out of a route and, just dizzying all around. My ears were ringing and everything. That I was like, okay, I should probably go home. So I had to like really feel bodily distress for me to say, okay, I probably shouldn't be here. Even though
Yeah,
I should have probably, listened to my body before that and said like, hey guys, sorry, I'm not coming tonight.
Remy, I feel like this is going to be a difficult path if that's what this took. So, look, I've had the same sort of thing happen in the past for me too. I'd be working out and I'd have some like almost like a snare in a muscle, and I'd feel like I should probably stop. And I pushed it enough times where I learned, okay, that's it. I just next time I feel that, doesn't matter how bad, doesn't matter if that's the end of the workout, I'm stopping. And I've done that, and I've probably prevented injuries by doing that. The problem is when you prevent something, you don't necessarily know it would have happened. You can't know you would have gotten injured, right? Because you didn't get injured. In this case, you felt bad beforehand, you felt bad during, and you probably felt bad after. There's got to be some feedback loop that eventually gets you to say, wait a second, I'm not in the right mindset slash physical body stance or whatever to be able to say yes to these things. Otherwise, like I said, what would it have taken? There's like an epistemological response to this that I feel, well, how do you gain knowledge? How do you learn something about yourself? And um, I, I know this probably doesn't sound as impactful to you as it might to me, but try asking yourself that question even right now. Like, what would it have taken Wednesday for you to have said no? And this is an actual question, not a rhetorical question.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, like I would have already should have like I would have been incapacitated before I went for me to say no probably instead of like getting incapacitated while being there.
Yeah,
And incapacitated is maybe a bit of an over exaggerated word there, but I hope you know what I mean.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like I would have probably already have had to be like vomiting on the couch ready before I would be like, okay, I probably shouldn't go.
So,
Because and like even then it's probably for the wrong reasons because then I feel like oh I might infect somebody else with this. Like it's not even because I would feel bad, it's because I might affect someone else.
so, now let me ask you this: what should have been the signal? So that was what would it
Oh,
have taken, which is like a practical, here's knowing me what it would have taken. Oh, a gunshot wound to my leg or something like that. Like, okay, I can't go climbing, guys. What looking back should have been the signal?
I mean, what should have been the thing was already like, okay, hey, my stomach hurts, I'm a bit tired. my body's clearly giving signals that it just wants to lay on the couch and listen to some music and watch an Adam stream, but
Giving signals.
I ignored that part.
Um, okay, so Remy, this is the retrospective process. This is why tenets are supposed to help because you're supposed to have the frame of mind to be able to look back and say what worked, what didn't work. So I know we haven't gotten to the point for why you say they haven't been working, but originally it was you were ignoring the reminders, which no process works if you ignore the process. And then maybe this I should just ask you instead of speculating. Why do you feel that they didn't work since our last session?
Yeah, so I set the weekly reminder every morning. I'd get a pop-up that's like, hey, do your tenet. Uh, I take a moment to think about it. Uh, and yeah, I don't know. For me, I just sit there and be like, okay, what did I didn't write them down or anything. Like if something happened, so I basically just, even if I got the notification and I tried to actively do something with it,
Yeah.
it just basically felt like it did nothing for me.
Okay.
Maybe I'm just not doing it right, but I don't know. It just doesn't really suit me, I think.
And I think that's fine. I don't want to shoehorn a methodology onto something where it's not going to work. But the way I sort of look at this at a high level, and this is a very like software developer way of looking at things, is there's a problem. There's a future where this problem never gets solved, and there's a future where this problem gets solved. And so far, we've been on the path of it not getting solved. And even asking you now, what would it have taken? You're like, well, I would have needed to be so sick that I'd be worried about getting other people sick. So there's got to be some mindset change. This is clearly a mindset thing. It's not a physical response. There's no reaction happening at like a chemical level here. It is your mindset is one way. If you recognize this is causing harm, the mindset needs to shift. It's going to take some medicine to help it go down somehow in the form of other people talking to you about it, you recognizing other concerns or problems, or I don't know what. Anyway, we at some point need to figure that out. And as you know, mentoring sessions are going to come to an end pretty soon. So this is something for you to take from the larger series of this, which is if nothing has taken so far, it means trying something different or trying something again with renewed intensity. So I'd like you to think on that somehow, but how this will change. Um, and yeah, this is where I've kind of said this in the past and possibly to you, but there's this concept of like nature whispers. And I don't believe in this from like a superstitious sense, but basically you get signs from different people and different things that, hey, you probably shouldn't do that. You probably shouldn't do that. Nature's shouting at you right now. Like Wednesday was a like, Remy, you really shouldn't do this. Your body's telling you no. Everything's telling you no. You went and did it. You were nauseated. You had to go home. So yeah, let's let's probably leave it at that because I think we've hit an hour. Is there any other? Yeah, we have. Is there any other like quick thoughts you have here?
No, no, I don't have anything else, I think.
Okay, cool. Yeah, then thank you for your time. And thanks for sharing this stuff. I felt like there was a sort of more somber tone here, and possibly it's because I started things out differently without an audio test and sort of jarred expectations a bit. But
No, no,
also, I think it's the recent news you had. Yeah, sorry.
I don't think it was on you. I think a lot of, I had a bit of complaining to do. Today it felt like a bit, a lot of things work related at the very least, have been a bit negative. So that's probably why it felt a bit somber there.
Yeah, and by the way, that's totally fine. I don't mean that as a complaint. And to be honest, like that's what I'm here for. That's essentially my job in these sessions was the career mentoring, and the other stuff is sort of separate, but I think they're intermingled in your case of the boundaries thing, which I'm glad you're taking the work healthy route of saying no on teams. All right. Well, anyway, thank you. I will wish you a good night now, and yeah, have a good
Thank
weekend.
you very much.
Yeah.
You too. Thanks for your time.
All right.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye, Remy.